chronology has handed you your narrative. It's an incredible feeling.
Is it that knowing the chronology helps with the structure of the book? Is it useful purely in the sense of craft? Or is there a kind of spiritual or metaphysical causality or synchronicity going on? Is the meaning of, these things happening the same day, The Last Temptation of Christ and the Basquiat overdose, or, Scorsese here and Leonard Cohen a few feet away here? Is there meaning beyond just the glee that we get as writers when we say, oh, this is going to make the chapter work?
Oh, there's meaning all the way down.
Hello, I'm Mark Oppenheimer, and this is ARC the Podcast. ARC the Podcast is a production of ARC Magazine, which is the public-facing web journal of the John C. Danforth Center on Religion and Politics at Washington University in St. Louis. We come to you every week or every couple weeks with an interview with another interesting figure from the world of art, politics, faith, and culture. This week, my guest is Paul Elie, and I want to say something about Paul Elie. Paul was not my first editor, but he was my second, and he was among the best. When I was a young author trying to make it, I had an idea for a book about crashing bar and bat mitzvahs, just taking a road trip across America and going to bar and bat mitzvahs everywhere I could and seeing what I found. And my agent sent it to a lot of editors, and some of them sort of got the idea. But you know who didn't? Most of the Jewish editors whom the book proposal was sent to. And I think the reason, in retrospect, looking back, that a lot of the Jewish editors didn't like the idea was because they had been to a lot of bar and bat mitzvahs and they had feelings about them, often negative, because bar and bat mitzvahs can be long and boring. They can often be a little bit pointless. They can be highly materialistic. They can be a little bit depressing to go to. But Paul Elie, who is a religious Catholic, he just got that there was something anthropologically interesting about this coming-of-age ritual. And as somebody with no baggage, with no skin in the game, he ended up being the perfect editor to help me do that book, to examine this really sort of weird and interesting historical phenomenon in Judaism. Paul and I have been friends ever since. He's no longer an editor. He works at the Berkeley Center at Georgetown University, and he is the author of 3 really, really terrific books, the latest of which is The Last Supper, Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. It came out about a year ago, and we reviewed it in ARC, but it also just came out in paperback, which gave me an opportunity to remedy the oversight that I never had Paul on this podcast. The book is about Andy Warhol and Leonard Cohen and U2 and Sinead O'Connor and Madonna and all of these artists, principally pop music artists, but also some visual artists and filmmakers. There's a lot of Martin Scorsese in it, who in the 1980s really treated religion in new and exciting and interesting and often heterodox ways. The book is this sort of smorgasbord of different scenes and moments and how they speak to each other and what it means that so much of it was going on in Manhattan in particular at that moment in time. Paul himself was a college student at Fordham in the 1980s, and he was often going down to Greenwich Village and playing in bands and seeing a lot of this art for himself. And so he brings not only a keen scholar's view to it and public intellectual's view and the chops of someone who's a great critic and writer, but also the really warm memoiristic tendencies of somebody who remembers this really, really fruitful artistic scene from his own youth. So please join me as I talk to Paul Elie about his book, The Last Supper, Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. So your book, The Last Supper, which came out last year and is just now coming out in paperback with a new photo insert, which it surely richly deserves because it's so much about musicians and also visual art and art. One of the comments you make, I can't remember if you made this early in the book. No, I think you told Andrew Sullivan this when he interviewed you, was that at the time you were thinking a lot about group biographies. You had read, as a lot of us had, although I think I didn't, I shouldn't make up that I did, Louis Manann's book, The Metaphysical Club, which was a group biography. Did you edit David Haydew's Positively 4th Street?
Exactly. Jonathan Galassi and I worked together with David, and I helped a lot with the shaping of that book, and kind of got some on the job training in group portraiture.
And that was a portrait. I read that. I remember exactly where I was when I picked it up. I was visiting my aunt at her house in New Hampshire. She had it bedside in her guest room. And first trip that my wife and I, then wife or fiance, had taken to visit that aunt who had a lot of books. And then I said, can I borrow this when I left? And that was a portrait of Richard Farina, Joan Baez, Bob Dylan, and
Joan Baez. Joan and Mimi Baez, and then Richard Farina and Bob Dylan.
Right. Thank you. What did I call her? Jane Baez? Julie Baez?
No, it's there. You got them.
Okay, good. And then you set out to write your first group biography, because I would say that the recent book is one. Your third book is one as well, but your first one was this group portrait of 4 Catholic writers, and that was, as I said, the first long, like really, I want to say dense, but I don't mean that as an insult. That's so often deployed as an insult. It's like meaty, intellectually meaty book that I read voluntarily after college, because I just spent 4 years, and then grad school. I spent 4 years in college and 6 years in grad school being assigned books, being told what to read. And then I was sort of liberated into this world where I could just go to a bookstore and read stuff. And you had done this. And so the latest book is similarly, it's a bigger cast of characters, but it's also, I think, could be called a group biography. So why don't you say a little bit about who this cast of characters is and what you think they have in common, that they should be put in the same book together?
For sure. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm in a dialogue with another group portraitist about group portraiture that's going to be published in a few days. Look, in retrospect, it looks like my 3 books are a kind of inadvertent trilogy about religion and the arts in the broad sense, and how they fit together. So the first book was a group portrait of 4 American Catholic writers, Walker Percy, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, and Flannery O'Connor. And that those 4 would be the characters. It was pretty clear relatively early. And I teased out the connections among them and learned a lot. But that I began with those 4 and kind of ended with those 4. Reinventing Bach, my second book, a lot of the idea for that book was involved using the form of a Bach suite, where it has 7 parts and they have kind of similar themes and melodies, but they go in different directions and in different places. I hadn't realized when I set out, first of all, that the people in the different sections knew each other, that Pablo Casals met Leopold Stokowski, that Stokowski was a hero of Glenn Gould's, that Gould was then involved in meditation on technology through Marshall McLuhan, another Canadian, etc. So the group aspect of it emerged in the writing, all the more so because it's a kind of meta group portrait. They're all engaged with one another through the medium of recordings, and they're all engaged with the same figure, Bach, who's not with them, obviously, but who's at the center of their lives. So then, with this third book, I started really with the period. I knew I wanted to write a book about the 80s. It's the time that really formed me. I was in New York, going to school at Fordham, getting a kind of stereoscopic experience where I had the sophisticated progressive Jesuit education up in the Bronx, went to the bohemian life in the village on nights and weekends, and then picked up the kind of drumbeat of the culture wars coming out of St. Patrick's Cathedral. And all that mix took a lot of sorting out. So years later, I thought, let me figure out what happened back there by writing a book about it. But it wouldn't go anywhere at first. I knew some figures I wanted to write about: Martin Scorsese and The Last Temptation of Christ, U2, Andy Warhol. But I made the mistake of beginning with Warhol's funeral, in effect killing one of the main characters before he lived. So that was one reason the book wasn't really moving. Pandemic came. I went back to first principles. I had a ton of time to write, no excuses. And 2 things happened. One is that I went back to The Life You Save May Be Your Own and found there Czesław Miłosz characterizing himself as crypto-religious in an exchange of letters with Thomas Merton. So that became a kind of skeleton key to interpret this work that I was trying to make sense of in the 80s. It's crypto-religious. And we can get to what that means in a moment. And the second thing that happened was I realized all these people are in physical proximity. That's more important than what religion they come out of. So suddenly Leonard Cohen comes into the book.
Now I've heard there was a secret chord.
He's writing Hallelujah, it turns out, at the same moment that Scorsese's in post-production on The Last Temptation of Christ a few blocks away.
Look at his wounds, Judas. They're bleeding.
Madonna is in New York in that period.
Life is a mystery.
Keith Haring, Prince. It became a book with a broader cast of characters with a whole variety of dispositions towards religion. And I try to honor that in the book by not suggesting that they're all alike, just to kind of let everybody sing his own song.
This is a detour, and I feel a little bad about this, but I don't want to let the question go away. I was thinking about all the histories that have been written about New York, and your book's not only about New York. I mean, U2 is not mostly a New York band, obviously, and the Pope John Paul II tours America. His first stop is New York, but he's not a New York dude. So, but your book is, heavily infused with the New York scene. I was thinking there have been all these other books about the New York scene. Obviously, Ross Whetstone wrote one, I think. I'm trying to remember. Is it Ada Calhoun who just wrote one about the village? Like, there's a lot of books about this. But here's my question: it's not about those books. Is there still a scene? Is there still will somebody be able to write a meaningful book about New York culture in the teens and 20s, 20-teens, 2020 period? Or has so much of culture moved online that actually the geographical proximity doesn't matter as much in a meaningful way?
I think geography really matters and will always matter. But it's more the expense of living in New York that's changing the artistic culture here, and also the velocity at which the culture moves. So let's go back to a famous New York story, the story, let's say, of Talking Heads. They developed pretty quickly. They were on the Village Voice cover after their second gig. But basically, between 1969 and when their first album came out in 77, they incubated living the lives of artists who weren't making a lot of money living in the city. And that both the low rent makes that possible, and the fact that you can kind of develop your work before going public with it in a big way. So those are big factors. I think the story that's going to be written about Brooklyn is going to be the story of the restaurant world, where that's where so much energy is right now. And I'm not saying it's rock and roll, but that's a history that somebody's going to write.
Do you care about the food scene?
I like living in a neighborhood where there are a lot of good restaurants. I can tell you that.
Right. But I mean, do you care about it? Like, I find food writing, I mean, I know sometimes a stylist will come along whose writing is so good, I'll read her or him on anything. And if it's food, I'll read it. But as a topic matter, it leaves me completely cold. I really, if it disappeared tomorrow, my life would not be much worse.
The writing about it, I'm not so sure, but I just think it's an area in which a lot of creative people have come to New York, and a lot of the incentives that were in place for like rock musicians in the 60s, you could make a lot of money, you would meet a lot of sexy and beautiful people, you would live as a bon vivant. All those things you see happening in this restaurant world, and I just figure that somebody, Pete Wells or somebody's going to write his book about it.
Is it more so than in, say, the 80s when all the the Frog Ponds, La Grenouille, Le Bernardin, Danielle. It's like seem to be on Dynasty. I mean, is it different somehow now? Is it more bohemian or something? Is it more like, I know the Times writes about it now, like the best restaurant is always some like shack that opened up in a strip mall way out in Queens. And I'm always a little dubious. It always seems to me that they're trying to force on me the idea that great food can be made for $3 by people with no training. And maybe that, I mean, for me, it can, because like I think Domino's Pizza is fabulous. So for sure, I'm an easy sell, but I always feel there's an ideology behind that of like, look at these people, look at this populism. And maybe it's true. Maybe that's the best food. But it strikes me that when I was growing up, I'm a few years younger than you, 5 or 6 years younger. My sense of reading, the Sunday Times was that restaurants were huge and were the centers of that being seen at the Four Seasons, being taken on a publishing lunch at a certain place at Elaine's or Michael's or whatever was enormously important. Is it different now?
Just think there's more of it. I mean, the whole neighborhoods, many more. Either we're more aware of it, there's just more of it. I don't want to get stuck on this, but I think that I just look around as I used to be in publishing. I still have an eye for what's the story.
Right.
And I think there's got to be a narrative work in how this thing metastasized, and somebody's going to write it.
Yeah. Well, sounds like it's not going to be you, but sounds like that's not where your tendencies are. But so back to this book, so you were thinking about how to make sense of the 80s, and Milos comes along. He and Merton are this kind of skeleton key. But then you have to develop this cast of characters. Was it principally geographic? Was it saying like, look at all these people? Leonard Cohen is working a few blocks from Scorsese. Madonna's moved to town. She's like doing her thing at Danceteria or wherever. Was it about, did it then proceed geographically? I'm going to look at all these people. And then you discovered that they all had crypto religious impulses. Like what's the order of, how do you end up selecting the characters out of in a scene that has hundreds of fabulous characters?
So let's just say I knew from being there so many of the people who made work that I came to call crypto religious. I saw U2 when I was in high school. I remember the day of Warhol's funeral because I was walking to work in Midtown. It wasn't his funeral, it was a memorial service for him on April 1st, 1987 at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I walked past the Mormons or whoever they were who were protesting against the Last Temptation of Christ. I couldn't wait for tickets because I had also to go to the office that day. I remember when Leonard Cohen made a kind of triumphant return to New York in 1986, and it was written about, it turned out, in crypto-religious terms in the New York Times. So for the most part, I knew the people I wanted to deal with. Once I kind of enlarged the tent to include a whole range of people. But I found over 3 books that the key to this kind of portraiture, group portraiture, is knowing exactly when things happened. So if you look at the daily chronology, that's when it emerges that Leonard Cohen is in the Royalton Hotel on his knees praying for the next verse of Hallelujah, and Scorsese's in the Brill Building at 1501 Broadway, 500 meters away, looking at footage of that was taken in Morocco of the Last Temptation of Christ. It doesn't really work if you don't figure out that they were actually there at the same time. In the same way, and more consequentially maybe, the story I tell largely concerns people's dealings with Christianity. Mm-hmm. But then there's a big kind of double backflip at the end, because the drama suddenly has to do with Salman Rushdie and the Satanic Verses. Now, the furor over the Last Temptation of Christ began before the film was made in the 1983 and crested when the film was released August 12th, 1988. And incidentally, so the night that the Last Temptation of Christ premiered was also the night that Basquiat overdosed. So once you learn that, then wow, look at these narratives converging. Up in the Ziegfeld in the 50s, people are lining up about the Last Temptation of Christ. And then Basquiat is in a loft kind of apartment on Bleecker Street that's actually owned by Warhol. And his friends, they have tickets or whatever you need at that level to go see Run DMC at the Nassau Coliseum. And they go over to pick up Basquiat to bring him, and he's dead. But anyway, so that's August 88. Now, in the cultural imagination of the United States, the furor over the Satanic Verses happened when the fatwa was issued, February 12th, 89. But the furor over the book began in England in August 1988. Proofs were in circulation. An Indian newspaper wrote a very provocative feature about it. Muslim figures started kind of massing against the book in northern England. This is a long way of saying that these two controversies, which we think of as separate and distinct, because one has to do with Christianity and the other with Islam, one principally in England and the other in the United States, belong to the same story. And it's like chronology has handed you your narrative. It's an incredible feeling.
Is it that knowing the chronology helps with the structure of the book? Is it useful purely in the sense of craft? Or is there a kind of spiritual or metaphysical causality or synchronicity going on? Is the meaning of, these things happening the same day, The Last Temptation of Christ and the Basquiat overdose, or, Scorsese here and Leonard Cohen a few feet away here? Is there meaning beyond just the glee that we get as writers when we say, oh, this is going to make the chapter work?
Oh, there's meaning all the way down, and I'll explain. So in that episode that I just spelled out, Scorsese and the furor over The Last Temptation of Christ, preceding the furor involving the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Satanic Verses by a matter of days or weeks, not months, all right? So the furor over The Last Temptation of Christ was driven by Christian evangelists who decided that the movie was a kind of conspiracy on the part of Jewish people who run Hollywood to put an anti-Christian product out there. So their campaign was waged against Hollywood movie executives in terms that were frankly anti-Semitic. And Scorsese was a part of it, but so was Lew Wasserman and other figures who were prominent in the movie studios. Khomeini comes along and he issues a fatwa against one person, Rushdie. And in the short term, it was terribly effective. He was driven into hiding. The book was pulled from shelves. People like Roald Dahl and John le Carré were denouncing Rushdie as an opportunist, etc.
Roald Dahl looks worse all the time, doesn't he? The more we know about him. I mean, his books are magnificent, and I would never not have had my children read Matilda and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But the more we know about him, the worse he seems. In my Judy Blume biography,
I don't know a whole lot about him, but I know that he was out of line on Rushdie.
Well, he was a horrible anti-Semite, and he also, in my Judy Blume biography, there's correspondence between him and Judy Blume in which he tries to kill a small book of criticism about children's literature that has a negative passage about him, and it's published by Random House Canada, and he's Random House England, and he basically tries to get the book killed because it's a little bit unkind to him, sitting on his millions of readers and dollars. I mean, he was a kind of petty man. That's the nicest.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
So anyway, to go back to this, it's variations on what René Girard called the scapegoat. So the evangelists go against the Hollywood movie studios. The Ayatollah goes against one man. Well, the next twist in this whole religion and controversy narrative involves Andre Serrano and Robert Mapplethorpe.
Mm.
So this time it's Christian evangelists abetted by Republican politicians. And it's as if they've learned from the Ayatollah Khomeini. It's much easier to go after one person than to go after the Hollywood movie establishment. Let's just scapegoat this guy Serrano. He's nobody. We can gang up on him easily. Let's scapegoat this guy Mapplethorpe. He's dead. So the Christian right borrowed the techniques from the Ayatollah for the next phase of their campaign. And I'll just, so you can see how deep the meaning goes. And that campaign involved Alphonse D'Amato going on the Senate floor with a copy of a Mapplethorpe photograph. And what did he do? He tore it up.
He went Sinead O'Connor on it.
Well, exactly.
Was this before or after?
When Sinead O'Connor tore up the photo of the Pope, it was a gesture that had been preceded by D'Amato in Congress, a couple of years earlier. And so for me as a narrative artist, that's just like brimming with significance. It's not merely a neat structural device. The chronology breeds like imagery that begins to kind of connect up, and episodes that converse with one another, and it gets really dense with significance. I think,
and tearing
you
up.
Can hear how excited I am just describing.
Yeah,
it.
and it occurs to me that tearing up a photograph, maybe this was part of your point, is the going after one visible person or one visible painting or photograph in a way that burning a pile of books isn't, right? You can't tell what if someone has a big pile of books burning, it's 20 books or 100 books. You don't know what the books are unless they tell you. But tearing up a picture of the Pope on Saturday Night Live or a photograph on the Senate floor, is that personalizing of it that you're talking about?
It's a visage and it's not words. Yeah.
Right.
And I don't think the photo was of Mapplethorpe. It was probably one of his images. But but the point is the same, that it's a human figure is being like figuratively dismembered before a live audience.
One of the structures of your book is the chronology and is the time period, which I think you go about 1979 to 1982, the sort of, or 92, the long 80s, as you call it. And another one of the structuring ideas is that you're not writing about religion so much as crypto religion. Why don't you tell us what that means in your book?
So with every book, you have to figure some things out almost ex nihilo, like for the first time. With The Life You Say May Be Your Own, is what is a pilgrimage? And I had to kind of work up a definition of what a pilgrimage is. With Reinventing Bach, it was working out the interplay of the two phenomena in Protestant Christianity, reform and revival, and how those things fit together, and then how they wind up shaping the culture of high art and classical music, which are perpetually being said to be in need of revival and about to die out. So with this book, well, what am I saying about these people who were engaged with religion in all sorts of provocative ways? Am I saying that, what kind of Christian is Bono? Is the fact that Warhol went to church and hung out in the back for like 5 or 10 minutes, many weeks? What does that suggest? What about somebody like Madonna, who seemed to have kind of left it behind with childhood and yet identified herself as still Catholic in an interview with Stephen Holden of the Times in 1985 or 6? Are these people more alike or different?
Mm-hmm.
So the term crypto-religious becomes my way to establish what they have in common without lumping them all together or suggesting that they're all equally orthodox or passionate about religion. Because I hate when people draft a favorite figure and say that this person is, like a great Catholic or whatever. Right. It's happened with Springsteen.
Right.
It's happened with some others. And Springsteen's in my book, and I try to capture exactly what I think Catholicism has meant to him by his own account and not go an inch further. So what do I mean when I say crypto-religious? Crypto-religious work is work that makes use of, obviously religious images and motifs and language and patterns, but from a point of view other than that of conventional belief. So then, as we encounter that work, whether it's a Last Supper done in kind of day-glow colors by Andy Warhol, or a Latin cry, Gloria by Bono, or a movie featuring angels who want to become real, like Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire. As we encounter that work, I think we wind up asking ourselves, well, what does the person who made this believe? What are they using this sincerely or mockingly or authentically or jestingly? And that question about what the artist believes leads to questions about what we believe. Well, what's my relationship to this whole tradition? And so a kind of economy, there's suddenly we're engaged in a way that's more than aesthetic, and that has to do with the religious.
Bono's a really interesting figure, and he pops up throughout your book. I remember Live Aid in summer of '85, right? July of '85, I want to say. And I was about to turn 11. I was visiting my grandparents in Philadelphia, and they had this little TV in their kitchen, which always felt very luxurious to me. It was actually the only TV on the first floor. They didn't have one in their living room, but they had one in their kitchen, which felt more fun somehow than my house, where you could go to the living room and watch TV. But the idea that you could cook and watch TV at the same time seemed really decadent to me. And of course, I was sort of having it backwards. They would have seen the fact that we had a TV in our living room as sort of decadent, because living rooms should be for conversation and reading. But so they sequestered it in the kitchen. But to me, it felt more fun for being in the kitchen. And I think my cousin Jason, who was 4 years older and was a huge rock fan, was over. And we basically, it went all day, right? Didn't the concert go?
Right. It was at Wembley Stadium and
New York,
Philadelphia.
Oh, that's right.
The Wembley segments were at noon or whatever.
Right. That's right. Of course, it was at Veterans Stadium in Philly. Is that right?
I think it was RFK, a football stadium rather than a baseball stadium.
And I was in Philadelphia. We were in West Mount Airy, so it was a few miles away. I mean, you could imagine you were hearing the roar of the stadium from where we were, but we were watching it on TV. And I remember these acts coming out, and I remember U2, which I knew through my cousin Jason, because he'd had the early albums, before Joshua Tree made them America huge. He had War.
And Joshua Tree wasn't out then, yeah.
Wasn't out then. So he had War and Boy, right? Wasn't that one? I mean, he had these early U2.
Boy, October, and War were the first three. Then Under Blood Red Sky, EP.
Right. So
Unforgettable Fire, and then
I think he was over watching with us and explaining U2 to me. And I remember even then Bono being claimed by everybody. The Catholics wanted him to be an Irish Catholic. And of course, that was significant for the Troubles, because if he was Catholic, then he wasn't Protestant. And the evangelicals just saw him as an emissary of Christianity, sort of in a broad church or Protestant way. And then there were just kind of spiritual do-gooders who said he's a kind of worldwide Messiah figure. And that was coming even more so, I think, in time. Like as you pointed out, he clearly wanted to be huge from the very beginning, and they achieved that. How did you end up deciding? What did you end up deciding about his religiosity? Of course, he and his bandmates gave quotations about it, where they, in different ways, kind of said, "We're not Orthodox Christians, but ... Here's how we are Christian." Or I think Bono said, "I'm not worthy of the name, but I am." How did you end up deciding U2 should be seen vis-a-vis Christianity?
Right. Let me kind of begin closer to the end, which is that they dealt with this question of what they believed in a big cover story for Time magazine in April '87, which was written by Jay Cox, who's a longtime friend of Martin Scorsese's, who was at the same moment working with Scorsese on The Last Temptation of Christ. So the connections kind of emerge and keep surprising you as a writer. But so I'd seen U2 in high school at SUNY Albany in the Mayfest, not free, $8, 8,000 people. They'd blown up in the interim, but they refused to cancel the gig because SUNY Albany was outpost for kids from Long Island who were the original U2 fans because of a radio station called WLIR that kind of broke U2 in the States. So I'd followed them all along. And in the book, I tried to bring out the surprising aspects of their career. The first is that when the video for Gloria played on MTV, it was one of the first videos in '81, probably one of the first 50 that MTV played. So you saw it over and over again. For American Catholics, myself included, that was some of the first Latin we'd ever heard. We grew up totally in the Vatican II church where everything was in English. So it wasn't like we recognized him as our kind of Catholic. It was more that he was bringing this older tradition that we knew the rumors of suddenly was on MTV, that he's singing Latin. That was, I remember feeling precisely that. The other thing is that they had been involved in this evangelical movement in Dublin. And to different degrees. One member wasn't interested at all, another a little bit, Bono pretty much, and The Edge really intensely. But they kind of cut loose from that in order to focus on the band, which was important and is a crucial moment in all the U2 biographies. But what then happened, and this is really unique to my telling of the story, as they got bigger in America, they realized that what it means to be an evangelical Christian is very different here than what it means in Dublin, where you've had 15 centuries of Catholic Christianity, and evangelicalism is like a breath of fresh air. So they had to recalibrate their Christianity kind of on the fly, because they were suddenly in the American market, and in the American market at a point in time when evangelical Christianity was a kind of stalking horse for white nationalism. So they deepened their musical roots, but they also deepened their religious roots, especially by connecting with Martin Luther King Jr. through the song Pride in the Name of Love. It was their way of saying, like, this is the kind of Christians that we are. Don't misunderstand us. We're on his side.
Right, and they play with Bo Diddley, right? They get into the black church. And then in Arizona, you make the point that when other bands are canceling appearances there because Governor Evan Meacham, and I guess with the legislature probably also, has rescinded Martin Luther King Day as a state holiday, they decide to go and play there in solidarity with King and with people who want it to be a holiday, and they donate money to various organizations on behalf of, in King's memory. So they end up becoming these white Irish emissaries of Martin Luther King's legacy in this heavily Mormon and quite conservative state.
Definitely. And they'd already had the show scheduled. The Joshua Tree deals with all these desert themes, so they wanted to open in a kind of desert area. And it was just by coincidence that it was a few weeks after the governor of Arizona tried to rescind the King holiday. So they didn't schedule the shows afresh. They kept their commitment. But it was a news story where the Times sending a culture reporter all the way out to Tempe and to run a story about U2 on the news pages. And there were many moments that led to the kind of global presence of U2, but that was a big one.
You take the book up to the early 90s, but I know you've remained interested in music ever since. Are there later iterations does crypto religion go away? Does it go underground? Does it come in a kind of sine wave where it's, there's less of it and then there's more of it? Because, when I look at where pop music is today and I see it through my children, I feel like the crypto themes, or the sort of unspoken themes, the complex themes, are seldom religious in the way that U2 always obviously was. And Prince and Madonna also always were. If you had any kind of critical insight into them, you saw they were doing these things.
Right. And so I think the crypto religious phenomenon is real and lasting. But towards the end of the book, I try to make very clear that I'm not favoring crypto religion over traditional religion. I'm trying to understand what happened in our society, in my life, in our time. And most reviewers and commentators have a kind of a dog in the hunt, like they want, because they're in the religious world. I'm trying to figure out what happened, not to direct the ship of American Christianity. So who are the crypto religious musicians? Nick Cave has really carried it forward. And who would have guessed, he was a real kind of Johnny Cash style, like Bad Seed in the Birthday Party. And then he named his band the Bad Seeds. But a lot of his music that draws on biblical themes has great integrity and authority. And he talks about it endlessly on the interview thing that he does. PJ Harvey, similar. That's it's a vein for her, less pronounced than in Nick Cave. What I'm interested to see is whether the ex-evangelical cohort is going to yield crypto-religious work. In many ways, the experience of evangelicals in the last 20 years mirrors that of Catholics in the 60s and 70s. Growing up with a very strong dose of Christianity and then kind of growing away from it in adulthood for various reasons, a lot of them having to do with sexuality, but also with scandal. So if that analogy holds, you'd expect that there would be a kind of ex-evangelical Madonna or ex-evangelical Scorsese.
Do you see anyone?
Somebody mentioned to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Julian Baker, the singer who's part of Boy Genius,
Mm-hmm.
as a musician, where some of this is going on, and I think it's the case, but I need to get to know her work better.
I mean, somebody who's coy about it does give a lot of interviews, so it's hard to see how much is he ex-evangelical or just evangelical or just eccentrically evangelical is Father John Misty. I don't know if you know his work at all, but
I know his work, and I didn't know that the father was more than a provocation.
No, he grew up in some very very Christian Protestant world of some sort, and I think has a pretty fraught relationship to it. But I haven't paid enough attention to his lyrics to have a thought on how it influences his music. Leonard Cohen's a really interesting figure here. There's someone whose star has only risen, right? From alongside the various recordings of Hallelujah, which I think his reputation among the masses has kind of been pulled aloft on the wings of all those cover versions. But also there have been several books about him. He's increasingly seen as a prophet. The Buddhist side of him is, some people warm to that. Some people warm to the Jewish side of him. If I'm not mistaken, there's that great legend that I think is not a false urban legend, but is true, that he either dated the Yiddishist Ruth Weiss or they were best friends or something back in Montreal or at Jewish summer camp in Canada. Like, he's somebody whose role in the culture is mulled over a lot. And yet his own version of Hallelujah is definitely the worst. It has all those like gaudy synths. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I was deterred from his work at the time I didn't like his voice.
Well, no, yeah, it's a hard voice to like until you decide you love it.
Well, but his voice changed in the mid '80s too. He was smoking a lot and drinking red wine, and it dropped a register really.
Oh.
And so the record that you mentioned, I think it's the one with Hallelujah on it. I compare it to like wearing a suit with padded shoulders. It's kind of dressed up in 80s finery, synths and beats. And a couple years later, though, he really recommitted to touring. And beginning in the mid 80s, he had a great band. It had a pedal steel. It had a synth, but it was mainly almost like an Americana band. But they could do everything from the kind of Kurt Weill type effects of some of his songs to a 60s like folk pop, to the grandeur of those songs. And there's a country aspect of his work that's always been there too. So then you get into these Leonard Cohen like online cults that compare the top 50 versions of Hallelujah.
Right.
The one in Poland is the one that people seem to love.
Oh, I'll check that
I
out.
watched the show. He was on Austin City Limits in Halloween one year. It's just great. It's almost like, how some people have the theory that there's an ideal age for different people. Like Leonard Cohen was always 50.
Yeah.
He just needs you to grow into being 50 years old.
Right. The way Paul Rudd is always 28 or 32.
So being an elder really suited Leonard Cohen and suited his profile, his wisdom, his stature, even the way of being a kind of rabbi to people, you know.
I was having an argument one time with a friend of mine who's a big Leonard Cohen fan, and I love Billy Joel, and he does not, and we were talking, and I love Leonard Cohen too, but we were talking about he was putting down Billy Joel, and I was like, come on, they do different things, but they're both part of the Great American or North American Songbook in important ways, and he pointed out a video. There's a video of Billy Joel in the early 70s when he was first breaking through, and he's sitting at the piano with that incredible facility he has, and he was imitating other singers. He played the piano Elton John style, and then he played the piano, I don't know, whatever, somebody else style, Burt Bacharach or something, and then he did his own style, and he was just kind of being glib and funny, but also a little bit condescending to these other artists. And my friend said, if you watch this, you see that Billy Joel has this immense gift, but he kind of sees it all as a hustle. And that then he writes songs that he knows will flatter people's, proclivities for melody or whatever. But he was saying it's all a hustle because he wants to be rich and famous, and nothing wrong with that. He said, but then you have Leonard Cohen, who literally is willing to disappear for years at a time to sit in silence and doesn't care about anything. Like the argument was Leonard Cohen's a true prophet. And I actually don't know if that's right. I mean, I don't know if I care, for one thing, but I also don't know if that's right. But it was an interesting take on him as kind of just that his own authenticity, his own true self was this kind of this plumb line or this constant that was not about seeking record sales or popularity.
I think that's true. Let me answer the question sideways.
Yeah.
One of the models for The Last Supper is Greil Marcus's work, both
Lipstick Traces and
Lipstick Traces.
Yeah.
So Marcus, by his own account, he's trying to uncover affinities that already exist, not trying to kind of impress you with the connections that he's making on the page. He's saying this stuff is there if we can just kind of find the connections. In his case, between like certain literary figures and then Elvis or the band in Mystery Train, or between the French Situationists and punk in Lipstick Traces. So Marcus, in Mystery Train, but also in his writing, especially on The Clash and Lipstick Traces, the trait that he emphasizes is the commitment of the artist to their material. And that's a theme in The Last Supper, in the sense that Scorsese's totally committed to making The Last Temptation of Christ. He says it may not even be a good movie, he says at one point, but I'm supposed to make it, and I'm going to make it. And Leonard Cohen's commitment to his material was total. The 80s were a terrible time for him in some respects. He was a Columbia Records artist since 1967, and they dropped him. They said, your new album is so uncommercial that we're not even going to put it out. We're going to license the rights to a Canadian label, Passport, because you have a big fan base in Canada. And that's the one with Hallelujah and some of the other incredible classics, If It Be Your Will, on it. The now record of Leonard Cohen's standards, as we think of them, was the one that Columbia Records considered like so far out of left field that no one was going to get this. It must have been devastating, but his commitment was total. He'd go on the radio and give these interviews of astonishing eloquence, talking about his work with a lack of apology or irony or self-deprecation about his commercial struggles. That he knew what he had, and he knew what he was about. And I'm saying this with passion because that became a kind of model for myself. Like, my commitment to my own work has to match that of Scorsese and Cohen. And so is Cohen a prophet? I think he uses the language of prophecy persuasively. But here's a person who managed to seem totally committed to art, to Buddhism, to Judaism, and to a kind of species of artistic Christianity, and in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's nobody like that, right?
No, it's true. It's true. You once told me, I think, about your own work. Maybe I'm making this up or projecting it on you, but am I right that when you have a book going, you write like a sentence a day or a paragraph a day and just trust that there's a slow accretion, and that's how you get to 500 pages after 10 years? Or did I completely invent that?
I definitely write every day. I mean, so I was a book editor for a lot of years. So writing, I loved editing and I loved working at FSG. It was an incredible place and still is. But life, isn't endless. So at a certain point, the exciting parts of the day became the time when I got to write. And I still feel that way. I haven't worked in publishing since 2012, but the experience of having a day job for a lot of years means that I love to write and I don't miss a chance. So especially since the pandemic, I just got up. My family would stay up late, binge watching The Sopranos. I'd try to go to sleep early, which was 1:30 in the morning, and I'd hear Tony Soprano's voice through the wall.
Was the rest of your family up? Your boys and your wife were up?
They were
past
staying
1:30?
up till 3 a.m. Yeah, our three sons and my wife, and I would go to bed at 1:30. But then I'd kind of get up while they were still sleeping and have a couple of hours when we were all cocooned together during the pandemic. And that's when, in this instance, that writing every day, suddenly the book gets really going and starts taking you places.
Wait, now I'm really interested. So did this continue even when they were back in some form of school, that they were up till 3, 4 in the morning?
No, but I said to myself, having regained the habit of writing every morning, I'm just not going to let that go. And so I just do it every morning now, and I look forward to it. And
that's great.
Some days it's just making an outline or something, but it's inviolable. And
what are you working on now?
Some journalism and 2 book proposals, which are finding their way. But those 3 things together are keeping me busy. I spent 6 months after the Last Supper was published on the trail of Pope Leo.
Well, but I want to get to him in a sec. I want to wrap up by getting to Pope Leo. But can you say what the book proposals are about roughly, or are you keeping your counsel at this point?
I can't, but the Robert Giroux of Farrar, Straus and Giroux, who was, I've had so many mentors, and he was one of them. And he said, don't talk it out when you're about to be writing it, because you want the pleasure of kind of telling it for the first time to go onto the page. But it will deal with a different way to do group portraiture, and also it's going to be a lot shorter than my three books that are about 450 pages each. Is probably the extent of my work at that length.
Is one of those 3 books selling better, or has one of those books been clearly the bestseller of the 3, The Catholic American Writers, Bach, or The 80s and Religion?
Yeah, The Life You Save May Be Your Own is the strongest seller. And there's a bunch of reasons for that, but the main one is, at the time that it came out, there were 30 or 40 good-sized city newspapers that reviewed books. Sacramento Bee, the San Diego Union Tribune, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, the Raleigh News and Observer.
I have to say
the
that
Atlanta Constitution, all those
what's funny to me?
Reviewed my book, and it really worked.
What's funny to me, and there's been a lot of attention lately to the decline, obviously with the Washington Post closing Book World, to the decline of newspapers reviewing books. What's funny to me is it's the easiest filler to get. There's always a local writer of some competence, in fact, a good local writer who would be willing to, for $25 or for free to review books. And now that everyone's moved online to a great extent, space is free. So it's actually, if you have a commitment to continuing to review books, you can have a pretty good book section for basically no money, which is not true of
I agree with you, and I don't understand it at all. I don't understand that the publishers send you the work for free.
Yeah.
The writer can, it's not like, and the book is then available to all your readers.
Right.
So the same newspaper, and I'm thinking of the Times that is, sharply curtailed its books coverage, still seems to have the wherewithal to send, people to Bayreuth to review the latest Wagner.
It's bizarre. And right. And And maybe different towns or papers would review different kinds of books. It wouldn't all be to my taste, but the book, this is not true of investigative reporting. It's not true of even sports journalism, where you often have to send, papers would send reporters on the road to cover teams. It was very expensive. Book reviews are functionally free to run, and I don't understand it. Like, for a rounding error, the Times could have as much books coverage as it's ever had, and not miss
And they've
the money.
still got a lot, and that has to be said. I mean, my book was chosen as one of the top books of the year by the Washington Post and the LA Times. But the Washington Post, the whole section was then removed, ironically, by the paper whose owner got his toehold in e-commerce through books. Jeff Bezos.
You've been listening to me talk with my friend Paul Elie about The Last Supper, Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. I should say that Paul is the author of two other books, one of which is The Life You Save May Be Your Own, a study of four Catholic writers, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, Walker Percy, and Flannery O'Connor. That is one of the best books I've ever read. If you want something about the Catholic influence on American arts and letters in the 20th century, that book is such a powerhouse. And he also wrote a terrific book on the uses of Bach and Bach's music over the years. So definitely dive into the Paul Elie canon. If you want to know what else is canonical, well, go over to arcmag.org. Arc, our web magazine, everything we publish is canonical. Most recently, a two-part series on World Soccer as World Religion. It's by Dan Friedman, and it's published right into the gaping maw of the World Cup, which started last week. We've also produced a video, an explainer, in which Dan Friedman talks about the ways in which soccer has actually become the world religion, and the World Cup is a pilgrimage or a hajj. So check that out on our website at arcmag.org. We also have a terrific piece by Daniel Oppenheimer, my brother, as it happens, about the potential of artificial intelligence to improve your marriage. He developed an app that uses AI to help husbands or wives send less toxic texts to each other. It's sort of a text message toxicity interrupter. And he wrote a really funny essay about it for arcmag.org. And also over at Arc, we have a new essay by the scholar Leonard Cohen about the importance of government support for family expansion as well as family planning. Why is it that governments typically will help you limit the size of your family by covering contraception, but won't cover fertility treatments or ways that you can increase the size of your family? So a lot of great stuff over at Arc Magazine. On the podcast, I have some really fun conversations coming up. I talked to Miroslav Volf, the theologian, and Chris Wyman, the poet, about their collaborative epistolary book made up of emails they wrote back and forth to each other. We're going to be airing that podcast in early July. I also have upcoming conversations with Nicholas Lemon about his new book on the history of New Orleans Jewry and his own family's role in it. Amy Laura Hall, the Duke theologian, has a new book out about muscular Christianity throughout the 20th century and into the Trump era. And I talked to her about that book. And Lila Corwin Berman, the historian, has a new book out about how Jews have been central to the American conception of citizenship. It's a, I don't want to say pessimistic book, but it rewrites the standard narrative that Jews were always welcomed as citizens. In fact, there were court cases over the years, right up down to the present, in which the question of whether Jews are a nationality, a race, a religion, an ethnicity, has become central to how we understand not only Jews' own citizenship, but the citizenship of other minority groups. And I talked to Lila Berman about that book. So definitely be a subscriber to our podcast. Don't just be a lurker. Don't just be a looky-loo. Be a subscriber. Go to Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you use and make sure that you're getting the podcast. And head over to arcmag.org. That's arcmag.org. And read the stuff we're putting up there. And now, back to my conversation with Paul Elie, the author of The Last Supper, Art, Faith, Sex, and Controversy in the 1980s. What's the story in our waning moments? You've written a lot, maybe more than almost any American, about Pope Leo, the American Pope. What's the story of his papacy so far?
The story of his papacy was that he emerged as a figure of fascination as an American, as a Chicagoan, as a person whose life had been spent doing mission work, not like most archbishops. And in the way of the relatively little known person, everybody wanted to know more. he took it slowly, and then he kind of stepped into history in the last 3 months because of the provocation of Trump's war of choice in Iran and Netanyahu's war in southern Lebanon, and the need to take a position about war, and then the personal vitriol that President Trump directed at him. So I analogize it, and I did this in the New Yorker last week, to the first year of the pontificate of John Paul II. That was 79. He was the first Polish pope. He was youngish. He was a skier. Everybody was fascinated. He had a kind of global aura. And then he went to Poland and spoke obliquely but powerfully against the communist government there. And everyone could feel the historical wallop of it. And I think something's happening now where we can feel that Leo's words and acts and gestures have world historical consequences.
So when someone like J.D. Vance, who is a Catholic as of 5 years ago, and you've written about him and his Catholicism, comes out against the Catholic hierarchy, whether it's his comments about the American bishops and their views on immigration, or whether it's his comments about the Pope, and they're in a kind of war of words, or people, and people, in a sense, the thinking is have to choose sides. Does anyone change their minds in all that? Is there anyone whose devotion to the word of the Pope or reverence for the word of the Pope is such that even though they're Republican and even though they voted for Trump and Vance, they feel like, well, the Pope says that, or the Catholic hierarchy and Vance are on opposite sides of this, and I'm with the Catholics. And is there anyone in the Republican world who, loves the Pope, but then says, well, I got to stick with Vance? Does it matter at all?
I definitely think it matters. I think the individual words and exchanges matter much less than is supposed. And partly they get talked about a lot because that's what internet commentary does. Partly because it's good for business for the Catholic commentariat. But I would say it exists with greater power on the level of image or gesture. So we were talking about Sinead O'Connor tearing up a photograph of the Pope. It's not really clear what was meant by the gesture, but the gesture itself had a valence, had a transfixing power. So when I don't understand Vance's comments against the Pope, I'm not even sure that they're intelligible. I don't know what's behind them, whether they're his own thoughts or those of one of his dialogue partners. But the polls certainly suggest that for Trump and Vance to oppose the Pope, that has alienated a good number of Catholics that formerly stood behind Trump and Vance. And I don't think it's because of they've worked out positions on the just war or Ordo Amoris. It's because it looks trashy and cheap for the vice president to be using like offhand comments against the Pope. In other words, it has more to do with this level of gesture or just the way people just thought it was wrong for Sinead O'Connor to tear up an image of the Pope. It's just, there's something out of line in the way certainly Trump, but also Vance kind of speak in a soundbite against the Pope.
Well, everyone should read your most recent New Yorker piece about the papacy. It's from May 8th. It's got the unwieldy headline, "The Pope's first anniversary is marked by more sparring from the White House." It was posted May 8th. And this has been terrific. Do you have time for a lightning round of 3 or 4 quick questions before you go?
Sure thing.
All right. So I always want to know with my guest, if you could have done anything else for a living within reason, what would it have been?
Musician.
What do you play?
A whole bunch of stringed instruments, guitar and lap steel and slide guitar. And I was a folk musician in the Village in the 80s. And I loved it then and I love it now.
Have you written about that? Your time as a Greenwich Village folk musician?
I haven't actually, and it's a good prompt that I should write about it. I've written an essay about the Clash that captures the experience from a fan perspective, but I haven't written about my own life as a performer.
Do you believe in God? And if so, what do you mean by that?
Yes, I believe in God, and I believe Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, an abiding presence, and I believe, help thou my unbelief, but I do.
Can you think of a song that brings you nostalgically back to a particular moment? And what's the song and what's the moment?
There's so many, but let's think of a good one. I'm going to throw you a knuckleball.
Okay.
My birthday is September 9th. So on September 9th or something of 2001, I went to the Village and bought this record I just read about by Sparkle Horse. And then when the World Trade Center was destroyed a few days later, that mournful work of Americana became like my personal sound of the days after 9/11. And it all comes flooding back if I put that record on, because its emotions are kind of up to the moment.
I've never heard of Sparkle Horse. I'm going to go listen to that. The last question is a bespoke one for you, which is, as somebody who's been in publishing and writing, God help the 23-year-old coming out of college who wants to be a writer, but what advice would you have for her or him today?
The demise of writing in the printed word has been predicted for my life for a very long time. So that doesn't mean don't take the challenges seriously, but don't uncritically assume that that's just the way things are, first of all. Second of all, do the work you want to do without thinking of the macro situation as much. The great thing about writing is that to a large extent, we have the means of production at hand. If I want to make music videos, certain things are required, space, musicians, sets, etc. But writing I can do with relatively simple startup costs and all that. So take advantage of that, and just be confident, because life is long, and if you're really writing, it will find its way to a public, I think.
Paul Elie, my friend, the book is The Last Supper. Thanks for hanging out.
Great to be in conversation with you. Thanks so much.
That was my conversation with Paul Elie. If you have thoughts, feelings, concerns, whatever, write to me at mark.o@wustl.edu. That's mark.o@wustl.edu. I would love to hear your thoughts on the podcast. Also, if you have suggestions for future guests on ARC the podcast, let me know. I get some of my best ideas from my listeners. Religious holidays coming up. Well, we just missed the Islamic New Year, which began on June 16th this year. But if you're listening early in the lifespan of this podcast, if it just dropped and you just listened, you may still have time to observe Juneteenth, which is June 19th. It's the national holiday that remembers the liberation of the last enslaved people in the South, when word got to the final slaves that they in fact had been free. June 24th is the Nativity of St. John the Baptist for Roman Catholics and Anglicans and others. July 5th begins Ashura, which is commemorated by Muslims worldwide, but especially by Shia Muslims. It's very important to them. The anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. And the martyrdom of the Bab in the Baha'i faith is July 9th. Some celebrity birthdays. June 18th, Paul McCartney turns 84. June 22nd is Meryl Streep's birthday. She turns 77. And June 28th, if he makes it there, and I think he will, Mel Brooks will be a centenarian, will be 100. A few days thereafter, fellow comic genius Dan Aykroyd, 74. And Sylvester Stallone is turning 80 this year, which is just kind of crazy. He shares a birthday with 50 Cent. That's July 6th. ARC, the podcast, is a production of the John C. Danforth Center on Religion and Politics at Washington University in St. Louis. It is the audio companion to ARC Magazine at arcmag.org. It is edited and produced by David Sugarman, with help right now from intern Kobe Rink, whom we are so happy to welcome aboard. I also want to thank the staff at the Danforth Center that makes all things Under Heaven and Earth possible. That includes Shelley Mitchum, our new assistant director, as well as the outgoing Deborah Kennard, whom we will miss. But if you're in St. Louis, check out her new bookstore, which is opening soon. I'm also grateful for the help of Sherry Pena and Hannah Pierce and Abram Van Engen and all the others. And until next time, just remember that I'm grateful to have you as a listener. It's wonderful to hear from people in the ARC podcast community. Subscribe to us and rate us and keep listening, and I'll see you next time.